Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so you've sent in your sources, and we're here to dig in, pull out the main ideas, and make them clear for you.
Ready when you are.
Great. Today, we're getting into the mind of, well, a really major figure, the Islamic scholar Ibn Taymiyyah. Specifically, we're looking at his pretty unique take on how matter comes into being.
Right. And we're focusing mainly on that social media thread by Mohammad AbdurRahman, aren't we?
Exactly. Using his thread and also dipping into his preface for Ibn Taymiyyah on creation ex materia and some of his other related writings.
It's a great starting point. AbdurRahman really breaks down some complex ideas there.
Yeah. So our mission, if you like, is to really understand Ibn Taymiyyah's core argument that matter originates from other matter, or energy.
Not just a rearrangement.
Right, not just shuffling the deck chairs. And definitely not creation from absolutely nothing. It's a view that asks big questions about reality.
And maybe surprisingly seems to connect with some ideas in modern science too.
Okay, let's get into it. For anyone not familiar, maybe just briefly, who was Ibn Taymiyyah?
Sure. He was a hugely influential Muslim scholar, theologian, jurist, active back in the 13th, 14th centuries, very well known for engaging deeply with, well, pretty much everything: philosophy, scripture, law.
And the key point for us today really kicks off his thread with.
It's this argument that matter originates ex materia, out of prior matter or energy.
Okay, so coming into being from something that already exists in some form.
Exactly. AbdurRahman stresses this isn't just saying, wood becomes furniture. It's more fundamental. A real coming into existence, but from a prior material state.
And AbdurRahman links this directly to Ibn Taymiyyah's argument against infinite actual division.
Yeah, precisely. That's a core part of the argument AbdurRahman lays out, referencing that book, Ibn Taymiyyah, on creation ex materia.
So the idea is you can't just keep dividing something forever and ever into smaller versions of itself.
That's the essence of it. Ibn Taymiyyah argued, rationally, that if you divide matter enough, you reach a point where further division doesn't just make it smaller, it actually changes it into something else.
A substantial change.
Right, a change in its fundamental nature. AbdurRahman uses this point that division has limits before transformation happens to show Ibn Taymiyyah saw this as a kind of origination, not just fragmentation.
Okay, I think I get that.
Yeah.
Like if you keep splitting a water molecule, eventually you don't have water anymore. You have hydrogen and oxygen atoms, which are completely different substances.
That's a good modern analogy, yeah. Or think about the classic example. Wood burns. It turns into ash, smoke, heat, light. It's not just tiny bits of wood anymore.
It's fundamentally transformed.
Exactly. And Ibn Taymiyyah saw that transformation as a key insight into how things originate.
And this is where AbdurRahman draws that fascinating parallel with modern physics, right?
It's quite compelling. He brings up particle-antiparticle annihilation.
Got it.
Where an electron meets its antiparticle, a positron. They don't just break apart.
They annihilate each other.
Right. And what comes out? Photons. Pure energy, basically. Light.
And the reverse can happen too. Energy becoming matter.
It can. Energy can condense into antiparticle pairs under the right conditions.
And AbdurRahman's point, echoing Ibn Taymiyyah, is that an electron and a photon are fundamentally different things.
Absolutely different. As AbdurRahman emphasizes, it's not just rearranging components. An electron has mass, charge. A photon doesn't in the same way. It's a true transformation.
One kind of existence becoming another.
Precisely. This idea of substantial origination, something new and fundamentally different coming into being from something else, AbdurRahman sees this mirrored in these processes. It really resonates with Ibn Taymiyyah's thinking.
So it goes beyond just movement or rearrangement. AbdurRahman also mentioned this idea about energy transfer involving a loss of ontological existence. That sounds quite philosophical.
It is a bit, but think of it like this. Ontological existence is just the basic reality, the being of a thing. When energy flows, say, from a hot object to a cold one, AbdurRahman, drawing on this line of thought, suggests the hot object isn't just losing, like, a detachable heat packet.
Right.
It's losing some fundamental aspect of its being as a hot object, which then contributes to the being of the other object, potentially changing it.
Okay, so it's a transfer of fundamental reality, in a sense.
Sort of, yeah. It's about the very constitution of the thing changing. And if a system can lose some of its fundamental being...
Then, AbdurRahman argues, it could potentially lose all of it.
That's the logical extension. And this is such a powerful illustration for AbdurRahman.
The matter-energy equivalence.
Exactly. Matter can be completely converted into energy, losing its matter existence entirely, and vice versa. AbdurRahman presents this as a modern scientific demonstration of the kind of total ontological shift Ibn Taymiyyah was talking about.
Okay, let's circle back to that core phrase, origination ex materia. AbdurRahman really stresses this. What did Ibn Taymiyyah mean by it exactly?
Well, like AbdurRahman explains, it means coming into actual existence out of some prior material condition or substance. It's origination, yes, but not from nothing.
Yeah, ex nihilo.
Right. Ibn Taymiyyah looked at the world and saw, plants grow from earth and seed, animals are born from other animals. Everything originates from something.
So he applied that observation universally.
He argued that this principle holds true even for the universe itself. It originated, guided by God, but from some kind of pre-existing material basis.
And AbdurRahman contrasts this with the Kalam theologians.
Yes. The Kalam school, another major strand of Islamic theology, is often strongly associated with creation, ex nihilo creation, from absolute nothingness by divine command.
So a key difference in understanding God's creative act.
Definitely. And AbdurRahman, referencing the preface to the book, points out that Ibn Taymiyyah saw his ex materia view as more rational, more intuitive, and actually better supported by scripture.
Interesting. AbdurRahman mentions a specific Quranic argument Ibn Taymiyyah used.
Yes, the verse that asks, basically, were they created by nothing, or were they themselves the creators? Surah At-Tur 52.35.
Powerful question. How does that fit the argument?
Well, the logic AbdurRahman highlights, based on the preface, goes like this. We see things exist after not existing. Clearly, they didn't create themselves, and they weren't created by nothing.
So that leaves...
That leaves an external cause. And since you can't have an infinite chain of things causing each other without a start, Ibn Taymiyyah concludes, as AbdurRahman emphasizes, there must be an uncaused, unoriginated first cause, an originator.
But this origination happens ex materia, from something pre-existing?
In Ibn Taymiyyah's developed view, yes.
Okay, because AbdurRahman also notes that Ibn Taymiyyah's views wasn't always so fixed on ex materia, right? There was some evolution in his thought.
That's a really important nuance AbdurRahman brings out. Earlier on, Ibn Taymiyyah seems to have entertained the possibility of God creating with or without prior materials. He questioned if a material substrate was absolutely necessary.
But he changed his mind. What led to that, according to AbdurRahman?
AbdurRahman explains that Ibn Taymiyyah later became firmly convinced that creation ex nihilo, it was logically impossible.
Impossible. Why?
His reasoning, as AbdurRahman lays it out, was that the very possibility for something to come into being needs to reside in something. There needs to be a potential, a prior receptive substance.
Like the potential for a tree is in the earth and the sea.
Exactly that kind of analogy. Without some pre-existing material condition, there's just nothing for the possibility of origination to even attach to. AbdurRahman highlights that Ibn Taymiyyah came to see this prior material condition as necessary for all origination, simple or complex things.
Okay, but wait. If everything originates from something prior, doesn't that lead to an infinite regress problem? Like, what did the first matter originate from? AbdurRahman addresses this too, doesn't he?
He does. It's a classic philosophical puzzle. But Ibn Taymiyyah, as AbdurRahman clarifies, made a critical distinction.
Between different kinds of regress.
Yes. He argued an infinite regress of originators is impossible. You can't have an endless chain where each cause depends on a prior cause for its own existence and power, what AbdurRahman refers to as a vertical chain of efficient causes. That needs a first cause.
Okay, that makes sense. But the other kind?
The regressive material conditions, one thing coming from prior matter, which came from prior matter, stretching back infinitely in time, Ibn Taymiyyah thought this was possible. A horizontal chain, if you like.
An infinite past series of material causes.
Yes. AbdurRahman explains this based on Ibn Taymiyyah's view. But, and this is key, even such an infinite chain of dependent originated things would still require an independent eternal originator to sustain the whole process.
So the infinite chain itself depends on God.
Precisely. As AbdurRahman outlines in his other work, The Argument for Islamic Monotheism, the dependence isn't removed just because the chain goes back forever. The whole sequence relies on the unoriginated originator.
Right. So pulling it all together, based on AbdurRahman's thread and these other sources, what's the big takeaway? What's the significance of Ibn Taymiyyah's view here?
Well, AbdurRahman highlights a few things. First, it provides a framework for believing in a creator God without necessarily having to accept creation ex nihilo. from absolute nothing.
Which might align better with our everyday observations and maybe even some scientific models.
Potentially, yes. AbdurRahman seems to think so. He suggests it allows a potential harmony between monotheistic belief and scientific observations that don't show things popping out of literal nothingness.
And AbdurRahman himself finds this view compelling.
He mentions his personal view, yeah, that this principle of origination from prior conditions might apply very broadly, maybe even down to the molecular level. He sees it as potentially strengthening belief in an originator because you see evidence of this continuous origination everywhere, every day.
Rather than just looking for a single past event.
Well, exactly. And historically, AbdurRahman also underscores how Ibn Taymiyyah was offering a critique and an alternative to some dominant strands of Kalam theology at the time. It was an important internal development within Islamic thought.
So let's try to sum this up from our dive, especially guided by AbdurRahman's perspective. Ibn Taymiyyah's argument: matter, energy, things in general, they originate from prior matter or energy. This isn't just rearrangement. It involves fundamental, substantial change. He used rational arguments about division and change, and AbdurRahman points out how these ideas find some, well, striking echoes in modern science, like matter-energy conversion.
Right. It's about continuous origination.
And critically, as AbdurRahman stresses, this allows for belief in an ultimate, uncaused originator God without demanding that the very first act of creation had to be from absolute nothingness.
That really captures the core of it, yeah. It reframes creation not just as a beginning point, but as an ongoing, divinely governed process rooted in material reality.
It's definitely been a thought-provoking deep dive. Following AbdurRahman's lead on this really makes you reconsider the nature of change in existence itself.
It does.
So maybe a final thought for you, listening. How does this idea, this perspective of continuous origination, everything arising from something else under divine governance, how might that change the way you think about the Creator's relationship with the universe? And with the everyday processes, the constant coming into being that we see all around us?
It definitely offers a different lens.
Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.